fraud, and to get tickets to fans instead of ticket scalpers using bots, a prime example of which is our verified fan service. Today's Ticketmaster is best in class in conducting large on-sales, marketing concerts, preventing frauds, and getting tickets into the hands of real fans. I do want to take a moment to address some confusion about what Ticketmaster and other primary ticketing platforms do and don't do. Primary ticketing companies, including Ticketmaster, do not set ticket prices. We do not decide how many tickets go on sale and when, and we do not set service fees. Pricing and distribution strategies are determined by the artists and their teams. Service fees, even if they're called ticketing fees, are retained mainly by the venues, and their portion of the service fee that Ticketmaster retains has been falling steadily over time. This leads to the topic of today's hearing, competition in ticketing markets. We hear people say that the ticketing markets are less competitive today than they were at the time of the Live Nation Ticketmaster merger. That's simply not true. In 2009, the Department of Justice alleged that Ticketmaster's market share was over 80%. It's a different story today. The most obvious change is the emergence of the enormous secondary ticketing market in which Ticketmaster has a modest market share and many strong competitors. But also in primary ticketing, the Ticketmaster of 2010 did not face the level of competition that we face today with new competitors highly capitalized, including SeatGeek, AEG's Access, and Eventbrite, along with established competitors including Tickets.com and Paciolan. Ticketmaster has lost, not gained, market share since the merger. And as I mentioned, today's competitive bidding process with numerous credible alternative ticketing companies result in getting less of the economic value in a ticketing contract every year. There are problems in the ticketing industry, problems we believe can and should be addressed through legislation. Many are the direct result of industrial-scale ticket scalping that goes on today. A $5 billion industry in concerts alone in the United States, fueled by practices that run counter to the interests of artists and their fans. The recent on-sale experience with Taylor Swift, one of the world's most popular artists, has highlighted the need to address these issues urgently. We knew bots would attack that on-sale and planned accordingly. We were then hit with 3 times the amount of bot traffic that we'd ever experienced. And for the first time in 400 verified fan on-sales, they came after our verified fan password servers as well. While the bots failed to penetrate our systems or acquire any tickets, the attack requires to slow down and even pause our sales. This is what led to a terrible consumer experience, which we deeply regret. We apologize to the fans. We apologize to Ms. Swift. We need to do better, and we will do better. Ticketmaster learned valuable lessons from this on-sale. In hindsight, there are several things we could have done better. And let me be clear that Ticketmaster accepts its responsibility as being the first line of defense against bots in our industry. It's an ever-escalating arms race. But in this forum where we're here to discuss public policy, we also need to recognize how industrial scalpers using bots and cyber attacks to unfairly gain tickets has contributed to this awful experience. There are many things we can and should accomplish together. We should enlarge the scope of the Bots Act and increase enforcement. We should enact categorical prohibitions on fraudulent ticket practices, including deceptive URLs and offering for sale tickets before they're on sale in the primary. We should mandate all-in pricing so that fans see the full cost of their tickets from the start. We share your goal of making live entertainment industry better for artists, teams, and fans alike, and it's in that spirit that I sit before you today, to work with you to make the fan experience better. I look forward to answering your questions.
Mr. Grotzinger.
Good morning, Chairman Durbin, Ranking Member Graham, Senators Klobuchar and Lee, and members of the committee. My name is Jack Retzinger. I am the co-founder and CEO of SeatGeek. And like so many millions, I am a fan. I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. Some of my happiest childhood memories are going to see Cleveland Crunch games with my dad. That's an indoor soccer team, seeing Cavs games with friends. My co-founders and I started SeatGeek because we believe profoundly in the power of live events, these magical things that create incredible moments, and yet believe that the experience of actually buying tickets is very much the opposite. It's antiquated, ripe for innovation. I've spent the last 13 plus years working in this industry, and there are three things that are clear to me and are clear to many others who work in live entertainment. Number one, a lack of robust competition in our industry meaningfully stunts innovation, and consumers are who suffer. Number two, venues fear losing Live Nation concerts if they don't use Ticketmaster. And number three, the only way to restore competition in this industry is to break up Ticketmaster and Live Nation. Some quick background on SeatGeek. We started the company in 2009, and initially, as was mentioned, we were a search engine that allowed users to search across a lot of sites. The company evolved, we grew over time, and importantly to this discussion, in 2016, we entered the primary ticketing market. Throughout our evolution, we have maintained intense focus on the consumer. We've launched many industry-first features that make it easier and more affordable for fans to go to events. And I'm super proud of all of the work that we've done at SeatGeek, but I also recognize the ongoing challenges that face our industry, some of which have recently been front-page news. The best way to address those challenges is to ensure there is robust competition where businesses and consumers can select the best products and services based on their merits. That does not happen today. It does not happen because Live Nation controls the most popular entertainers in the world, routes most of the large tours, operates the ticketing systems, and even owns many of the venues. This power over the entire live entertainment industry allows Live Nation to maintain its monopolistic influence over the primary ticketing market. As long as Live Nation remains both the dominant concert promoter and ticketer of major venues in the US, the industry will continue to lack competition and struggle. As discussed, Live Nation Entertainment is the product of the 2010 merger of Ticketmaster and Live Nation. And as was also mentioned, they entered into a consent decree, which banned Ticketmaster from threatening or retaliating against venues by withholding Live Nation concerts. That did not work. It has not worked at all. The DOJ's 2009 investigation confirmed that Live Nation had violated the consent decree repeatedly, almost since its inception. The DOJ identified numerous examples of Live Nation threatening and retaliating against venues that did not contract with Ticketmaster. Today, Ticketmaster's estimated market share is over 70% of the US primary ticketing market. Ticketmaster is the primary ticketing provider for more than 80% of the NBA, NHL, and NFL teams. Live Nation is also the largest promoter of major concerts in the world, promoting more than 73% of the top 25 tours in the US in 2021. It is no mystery why no other company has significantly penetrated the primary ticketing market. Major venues in the US know that if they move their primary ticketing business from Ticketmaster, they risk losing revenue they earn from Live Nation concerts. They know this because Live Nation has told them so, directly and indirectly, through its public pronouncements, private communications, and subsequent retaliation against venues that have signed deals with a competitor. The DOJ found that as a consequence of Live Nation's conduct, quote, venues throughout the United States have come to expect that refusing to contract with Ticketmaster will result in the venue receiving fewer Live Nation concerts or none at all, unquote. Our industry provides a cautionary tale about how behavioral remedies cannot solve the problems inherent in an anti-competitive merger. The only effective remedy now is a structural one, the dissolution of the common ownership of Ticketmaster and Live Nation. To improve our industry, we must restore competition. At SeatGeek, we deeply care about the live event industry and believe it's time to give fans, teams, artists, and venues alike the choices they deserve. It's a privilege to be included in this discussion. Thank you so much for your time and attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Grotzinger. And next up, we have with us Mr. Michelson. Thank you. And thank you for your work you do with the Palace in St. Paul, Minnesota.
Thank you, Senator. Talk on. Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Chairman Durbin, Ranking Member Graham, Senator Klobuchar, and Senator Lee, along with all the other members of the Senate Judiciary Committee, for allowing me to appear before you today. I'm here to speak on behalf of my colleagues, fellow promoters, and most importantly, the concert fans. My appearance before you is based on my 50 years of experience in the live entertainment industry. For the record, my name is Jerry Michelson, CEO and president of Jam Productions, a company that has produced and promoted events since 1972. As a primer for those who may not know, let me briefly talk about the job of promoters. We work with agents and managers to route tours into markets across the country. We make guaranteed payment to artists, contract with the venue to hold the event, market the show, put tickets on sale, and produce the show. We pay all the costs and assume all the risks. When Live Nation loses money on a concert, they can make up for that with operating income from ticketing and sponsorships. We can't do that. We don't have those. Pepsi doesn't earn money from Coke, but our competitor, Live Nation, earns money from selling tickets to our concerts. In 2009, I appeared in front of the committee to testify about the proposed merger of Live Nation and Ticketmaster. At that hearing, I stated the unification of these two Goliaths would create a business with extraordinary market power and clout unlike any that I've ever seen in my lifetime. I testified that if this merger was allowed to proceed, the combined entity would have the ability to suppress or eliminate competition in many segments of the industry. Today, we know with certainty that this merger is vertical integration on steroids, using dominance in one market to expand its power and dominance in another, cutting out the competition and harming the consumers. From my vantage point, the arena-level concerts used to be Jam's most profitable segment of the business because that's where we earned our money. In 1996, Jam produced 100 concerts in arenas, but in 2011, 1 year after the merger, that decreased to 46 concerts. And in 2022, we only produced 14 arena concerts. Live Nation went after the arena business, and they succeeded in driving us and other independent promoters out of that sector. Live Nation effectively eliminated competition for indoor arena shows by utilizing the following methods: purchasing national indoor tours in arenas and for their outdoor amphitheaters, threatening financial penalties on a tour deal if the artist wanted to work for Jam, paying a band 100% or more of the gross ticket sales, and Live Nation managed artists typically only perform for Live Nation promoted shows at the arena level. Now Live Nation is going after music theaters and clubs of all sizes in an effort to control the entire live music industry from the top to the bottom. From 2010 to 2021, Live Nation added 61 theaters and 41 clubs to their already large arsenal of venues. The near complete domination of arenas because of the merger could soon happen in theaters and clubs in every community in the country. On a 2016 Live Nation earnings call, Michael Rapino, their president and CEO, said one of the company's biggest goals was to convince artists to agree to integrate the primary and secondary ticket markets to grow Live Nation's share. Rapino stated, and I quote, "Artists, the more they get comfortable with seeing primary and secondary together, our market share grows." With that statement, Rapino acknowledged that they are not serving artists, they are serving themselves. There are two antitrust decisions I'd like to bring to your attention where vertical integration played a prominent role in restricting competition. The 1948 Supreme Court decision in the U.S. versus Paramount led to the abolishment of block booking and forced the movie studios to sell off their theater chains. An excerpt from the Eastman Kodak case states, "The court has held many times that power gained through some advantage can give rise to liability if a seller exploits his dominant position in the market to expand his empire into the next." Every time that Live Nation or Ticketmaster blames anybody else for the significant issues and increasingly high fees, remember that many times they are the venue, the promoter, and the manager of that artist. By controlling ticketing and promotion, the artist management company, they're choking off competition that would offer an alternative to the broken system we see today. This was most acutely seen in Taylor Swift, and it's playing out across the live music industry every day and generating fan outrage and despair. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Michelson. Next up, Mr. Nuzzo.
Madam Chairwoman, members of the committee, I would like to thank you for the honor and the opportunity to appear before you this morning. My name is Sal Nuzzo, and I serve on the policy team at the James Madison Institute in Tallahassee, Florida. We are a nonprofit economic policy think tank that focuses on the policy issues impacting Florida's 22 million residents. Fresh out of college and starting a career in policy, I dreamt of one day testifying before the United States Senate on an issue of profound importance, maybe international monetary policy or perhaps a Supreme Court nomination. But as my 14 and 13-year-old daughters informed me last night, Dad, nothing you speak on in your career will be as important as what you say today. Don't mess this up. So here we go. Florida is home to 13 major sports teams, 15 Major League Baseball spring training facilities, NASCAR, F1, the PGA, LPGA, college, and numerous other sports venues. I say that because most of those venues serve as concert sites when they're not in use during their respective seasons. In Florida, sports and live entertainment is a $6.5 billion market, a sizable share of the nation's $133 billion economic impact in this area. So this issue is important to Floridians, not just with respect to primary ticketing, but also the secondary ticket market, which I would like to open with. I'd like to offer our perspective by way of a brief analogy. Because I'm an employee of a nonprofit organization, I drive a 15-year-old Volvo with 200,000 miles on it. God bless the Swedes. I purchased it from a private seller in 2015, and much to my kids' dismay, it's still going strong. Volvo didn't place a single restriction on the automobile when I purchased it, and if and when I decide to sell it, they'll likely have no role in the transaction. In fact, I don't think they have a clue what's happened to the car since it left their dealership. This is true for just about every auto manufacturer. Consequently, our auto market is a robust, thriving, and diverse industry largely adhering to the forces of supply and demand. The same could be the case for the market governing the selling, marketing, and resale of tickets to sports, competitions, and concerts. It could be, but it has not occurred. There is, as we've spoken about, one dominant market player approaching 80% of the primary market. This does allow them the ability to leverage that dominance through service fees, exclusivity requirements, and other practices that are ultimately borne by consumers. At its core, a debate is occurring over what a person actually obtains when they purchase a ticket. Some would argue that the purchaser is simply leasing or renting a space in a venue, and that the lease is subject to terms and conditions. In our opinion, that logic rests on a misguided assumption that the commodity is the venue. Ask anyone attending a Jaguars game, or a Harry Styles concert for that matter, where they're going, and they'll reply, I'm going to the Jags game, or I'm going to take my daughters to see Harry Styles. They would not reply with, oh, I'm going to TIAA Bank Field this afternoon, or just taking my kids to Amway Arena tonight. The stadium may have a lifespan of 50 years, but an individual purchases a commodity with a much more limited lifespan, a couple of hours. This distinction, in our opinion, is vital to the debate over the issues within the event ticketing space. Over the last several years, we've heard the term consumer welfare standard uttered much more frequently. Questions over whether the standard is still applicable in today's innovation economy, whether it should be replaced with some other form of subjective measure, and in the age of tech platforms, what consumer welfare even means. I would ask you all today, as we conduct this hearing, to set that principle aside. In this area, we would contend that consumer welfare is very clearly defined and reflective of the issues and challenges within this industry. Those representing the dominant player in the market would contend that their growth has allowed them to innovate and make advances that greatly benefit consumers. A few million Taylor Swift fans would respond, this is why we can't have nice things. To be clear, from our perspective, the issue isn't the Taylor Swift crash per se. That merely revealed how a lack of competition over time has corroded innovation and distorted the market. I would ask, suppose a robust, vibrant, and competitive market for ticketing had been allowed to evolve and innovate over the last 20 years. Would the Taylor Swift crash have occurred? It's a hypothetical, of course, but absolutely one worth considering. I will conclude my remarks with a call to you as policymakers. On this topic, in this arena, consumer welfare is very clear to define, and there are actual harms to consumers from anti-competitive practices. Thank you to all, and I appreciate the opportunity to be before you today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nuzzo. And next up, Ms. Bradish.
Thank you, Chairman Durbin, Ranking Member Graham, Senators Klobuchar and Lee, and members of the committee. It is an honor to be here today to lend the American Antitrust Institute's perspective to the issue of competition in live entertainment. AAI applauds Senate lawmakers for turning their attention to a serious competition issue that hurts concertgoers, artists, and smaller competitors across the live entertainment industry. There are a few major points and policy recommendations that I would like to highlight today. First, Live Nation Ticketmaster is an example of, on one hand, a very traditional monopoly in the mode of Standard Oil, and on the other, a 21st century digital player, like other online platforms, dominating an ever-widening swath of its industry. Its dominance in markets up and down the live entertainment supply chain creates the incentive and the ability to limit competition to protect its market position. On the concert side, this includes excluding smaller or independent concert promoters and venues. In digital ticketing, this includes excluding ticket resellers and brokers who provide important competition via the secondary ticketing market. Customers pay the price for these monopolistic acts with higher ticket prices and fees, lower quality, less choice, and less innovation. Artists who lack the blockbuster power of a Swift or a Springsteen lose out. Smaller rivals in the supply chain also lose out. Second, we should learn from the failure of the conduct remedies that were a condition of the DOJ's clearance of the 2010 merger of Live Nation and Ticketmaster. A lengthy DOJ investigation concluded in 2020 that Live Nation Ticketmaster repeatedly violated the requirements of the consent decree. Unfortunately, rather than seeking an effective structural remedy, DOJ simply amended some of the language in the consent decree and extended the decree for another 5.5 years. The amended decree did nothing to change Live Nation Ticketmaster's anti-competitive incentives. This current DOJ has recognized the ineffectiveness of behavioral remedies that run counter to a company's incentives. DOJ should pursue new enforcement action to obtain effective structural relief. This could be through a consummated merger challenge under Section 7 of the Clayton Act or a monopolization case under Section 2 of the Sherman Act. Separating ticketing from promotion and venues would eliminate the incentives to stifle competition. And reducing the market share of Ticketmaster through spinoffs would address Ticketmaster's incentives to limit competition in secondary ticketing. Protecting consumers, artists, and smaller rivals from Live Nation Ticketmaster's harmful conduct will require multiple policy tools, including strong antitrust enforcement against Live Nation Ticketmaster and legislative action. AAI urges enforcers and lawmakers to consider 3 major features of a multi-pronged approach to the Live Nation Ticketmaster monopoly problem. First, consider standards that enable the agencies to challenge vertical mergers as effectively as horizontal mergers. The incipiency standard in Section 7 of the Clayton Act is designed to prevent all mergers that may enhance market power and lead to anti-competitive effects. We currently have a structural presumption for horizontal mergers. We badly need a presumption for vertical mergers, either through legislative action or new antitrust guidelines that get adopted by the courts. Second, support more vigorous antitrust enforcement with legislation designed to strengthen and clarify the U.S. antitrust laws. Senator Klobuchar's proposed Competition and Antitrust Law Enforcement Reform Act is a leading example. The bill would, among other things, update legal standards for mergers and strengthen the standard for prohibiting exclusionary conduct by dominant firms. Such reforms would reduce the formidable burdens on the government for bringing monopolization and merger cases. Finally, consider the merits of an oversight regime to facilitate access to and transparency in ticketing. Dominant digital platforms can engage in practices designed to self-preference, such as steering music fans to Ticketmaster's proprietary ticketing services. Solutions to these problems may well require establishing rules of the road or codes of conduct for digital ticketing platforms. Such legislation has been proposed at both the state and federal level. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. And last but not least is Clyde Lawrence of the band Lawrence. And I will say, looking at your testimony ahead of time, Mr. Lawrence, I particularly enjoyed the line that perhaps you'll repeat, that while you are so proud of your band, we're not artists yet on the level of acts like Taylor Swift or Bruce Springsteen, though we do hope one day to be big enough to crash a ticketing website. With that, I turn it over to you, Mr. Lawrence.
Thank you. I hope it'll get as big a laugh when I say it than as when you just did. Good morning, Senators, and thank you for inviting us today to the most unique gig we've had in years. My name is Clyde Lawrence, and this is Jordan Cohen. We are two of the 8 members of Lawrence, a soul pop band from New York City. Before telling you more about who we are, it's important to clarify who we're not. We're not lawyers or economists with expertise in antitrust policy. And as Senator Klobuchar said, we're also not artists on the level of acts like Taylor Swift or Bruce Springsteen, though we do hope to one day be big enough to crash a ticketing website. What we are, however, are seasoned artists who have toured extensively over the last 7 years, starting with empty bars and working our way up to headlining sold-out shows for thousands of people and seeing our music chart on Top 40 radio. While we became musicians because of our passion for making music, we realized early on that we needed to embrace the entrepreneurial aspects of pursuing careers as artists. Ever since we started touring, we've tried to be vocal about the lopsided deal mechanics we were facing, even including the lyric, "Live Nation is a monopoly," in our latest album. Whether or not it meets the legal definition of a monopoly is someone else's call to make. We're here just to tell you what we've observed. While Jordan and I discussed those dynamics in depth in our written testimony, most of the issues we face stem from the fact that Live Nation Ticketmaster often acts as 3 things at the same time: the promoter, the venue, and the ticketing company. Let's imagine we just played a sold-out show at a venue Live Nation owns and operates. When an artist plays these venues, they're required to use Live Nation as the promoter. Far from simply advertising, the promoter coordinates and pays the upfront costs to put together a concert, such as renting and staffing a venue and striking a deal with the performer. Since both our pay and theirs is a share of the show's profits, we should be true partners, aligned in our incentives. Keep costs low while ensuring the best fan experience. But with Live Nation not only acting as the promoter, but also as the owner and or operator of the venue, it seriously complicates these incentives. At the end of the show, costs will have eaten into most of the money made that evening, and due to Live Nation's control across the industry, we have practically no leverage in negotiating them. If they want to take 10% of the revenues and call it a facility fee, they can and have. If they want to charge $30,000 for the house nut, they can and have. And if they want to charge us $250 for a stack of 10 clean towels, they can and have. Once these costs, some of which went to Live Nation subsidiaries, are taken into account, the remainder is split between Live Nation and the band. In a world where the promoter and the venue are not affiliated with each other, we can trust that the promoter will look to get the best deal from the venue. However, in this case, the promoter and the venue are part of the same corporate entity, so these line items are essentially Live Nation negotiating to pay itself. Does that seem fair? The tickets were listed at $30, and our pay ended up shaking out to about $12 of each ticket. But in this hypothetical show, the fan did not pay $30 for that ticket. The fan paid $42 because Ticketmaster tacked on a 40% fee. And for the record, we've had them go as high as 82%. As with promotion, if an artist plays at a Live Nation venue, the artist has no choice but to have the show ticketed by Ticketmaster. And to be clear, we have absolutely zero say or visibility in how much these fees will be. We find out the same way as everyone else by logging on to Ticketmaster once the show already goes on sale. And in case you're wondering, no, we, the artists, do not get a cent of that fee. So of the $42 a fan spent on a ticket, we receive 12. But whereas Live Nation's costs were already covered at this point in the calculation, we still need to pay for our touring costs. In our case, roughly 50% of our earnings is used to cover expenses. So that leaves us with $6 for an 8-piece band, pre-tax, and we also have to pay our own health insurance. To be fair, many of the issues we've addressed here are not exclusive to Live Nation Ticketmaster, and we've had a number of positive experiences with parts of Live Nation. Their venues are often filled with hardworking and passionate people, and most importantly, we love that all of their venues have one consistent Wi-Fi network and password. That one's a real game changer. Jokes aside, we truly do not see Live Nation as the enemy. They're just the largest player in a game that feels stacked against us as artists, and often our fans as well. Ultimately, when looking at the current state of the industry, we're left with lots of questions. Why is it that all of Live Nation's costs get recouped before the show hits its profit point, yet ours, the artists, don't? Why is there so little transparency as to what line items such as facility fees actually go towards? Why is it standard for Live Nation to take a 20% commission on our merchandise sales while we never receive a cent of their ancillary revenues like concessions, alcohol, and parking? Finally, why is Live Nation allowed to freely set exorbitantly high ticket fees without any transparency or input, while in other industries the government has mandated caps on various types of junk fees? We look forward to seeing these questions get some answers. Thank you for your time, and we hope to see some of you at one of our band's concerts. If you'd like to come, let me know, and I'll throw you on the guest list to help you avoid the ticket fees.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lawrence. I think we're willing to pay, but we really appreciate your testimony.
It's on us.
Okay. With that, I'm going to turn it over for the first round of questions to our chair, Senator Durbin.
Thanks, Senator Klobuchar. Mr. Lawrence, I'm going to stick with you for a minute because you made it clear that you do not set the ticket price. And Mr. Berchtold said he doesn't have anything to do with the ticket price. Who does set the ticket price?
That's an excellent question. That was actually the thing I was most surprised to hear in Mr. Berchtold's speech, because we definitely have absolutely no say. And if we actually ask the venues in advance, which we often do, they say that's a Ticketmaster thing. So the fees, I mean, we actually do set, the ticket prices, the base price. The artist does have a say in setting for sure. But those added Ticketmaster service fees, we have absolutely no say. And the venues claim that it's a Ticketmaster
Mr.
thing.
Berchtold, you want to add anything to that?
Thank you. Yes, as Mr. Lawrence said, the band sets the ticket price. The service fee level is set by the venue.
And you control the venue,
In
do you not?
of approximately
Live Nation?
4,000 venues in the United States per Pollstar, Live Nation operates approximately 200. So roughly 5% of the venues in the
Are they the
country.
biggest?
No, sir, they're generally not the biggest. The biggest tend to be the sports venues, the arenas, the stadiums controlled by the sports teams or the owners of the sports teams.
Mr. Grotzinger, you had an experience at Barclays, did you not, in terms of an opportunity for your company to take over a venue that had been controlled by Ticketmaster? How did that work?
The New York Times reported a few weeks ago how once we took over ticketing for the Barclays Center in Brooklyn, the Barclays Center saw a marked decrease in the number of concerts from Live Nation that were sent to that venue versus historical averages. So earlier last year, the Barclays Center management came to us and said, we'd like to keep using you for ticketing our basketball, but we want to be able to use Ticketmaster to ticket concerts. And we looked into it and couldn't get the economics to work. So we said to them, listen, let's just, part ways amicably, and we did.
So they used their power of the marketplace to diminish the number of acts at that venue, and the venue decided they had to go back to Ticketmaster.
There was certainly, as Pollstar public data shows, a marked increase in the number of shows Live Nation played at that venue after the venue decided to move away from
Mr.
Ticketmaster.
Berchtold, is that true?
I believe, Senator, that what the New York Times indicated was that another venue opened in the marketplace, So you now had two venues vying for the shows that weren't going to Madison Square Garden, and that the number of shows going to Barclays from all the major promoters went down as a result of that increased competition. I have not heard of any allegations that we changed in any way our booking of concerts for that venue. It's a matter that I watch very closely given the profile of the New York market. I understand every decision about every show, where it was placed and why. We have records determining that in no cases was there any retaliation against Barclays in the placement of shows.
Mr. Grotzinger, last word on Barclays?
Yep, I don't have more to add specifically on retaliation there. I would note that the DOJ report in 2019 found numerous instances of Live Nation threatening and retaliating against venues once they had moved away from Ticketmaster. In one case, the Live Nation president told the venue that they would, quote unquote, go nuclear if they left. So the threat is real. It's been documented. It happens across many venues.
Mr. Michelson, Mr. Berchtold defended his market position in one element, saying it was a battle of the bots. Have you run into that phenomena?
Ticketing companies, one of the things they're supposed to do is have solutions to bots. And for the leading ticket company not to be able to handle bots is, for me, pretty an unbelievable statement. But you can't blame bots for what happened to Taylor Swift. There's more to that story that you're not hearing.
Ms. Bradish, you probably heard Mr. Berchtold's suggestions or read in his testimony 3 things he thinks need to be done, which included all-in pricing on the tickets, fighting deceptive URLs as an example, and creating a civil action under the Bots Act. Any reaction from you to those suggestions?
Well, none of those suggestions go to the core of what we've been talking about today, which is the antitrust problem. The fact that Live Nation Ticketmaster, because of its market power, has the incentive to do things to exclude competition in all of its markets up and down the supply chain for live entertainment. So I appreciate those suggestions. Many of them may be good ideas, but it does not change the fact that Live Nation Ticketmaster is a monopoly and will act because that's its incentive to exclude competition.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Senator Durbin. Next up, Senator Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Bradish, I'd like to start with you. Back in 2010, the antitrust complaint filed by the Department of Justice against the proposed merger between Ticketmaster and Live Nation alleged, among other things, that Ticketmaster had at the time an 83% market share, with no competitor, no single competitor, having more than 4% of the market. It also alleged that Live Nation, for its part, was Ticketmaster's biggest customer and was the leading concert promoter at the time, of course. It also alleged that Live Nation had begun competing directly with Ticketmaster for ticketing services, rising over a very short period of time to 16% of the market share in just 2 months, kind of a meteoric rise. So with that in mind, why, in your view, did the Department of Justice settle what seems to be a strong case that appears to involve the elimination of head-to-head competition with a monopolist? And would you agree that what we have here is not a shortcoming necessarily of our antitrust laws, but error, perhaps gross negligence in enforcing them?
Well, I think that there are 2 elements to why the DOJ would take a consent decree rather than pursue a case in court. Obviously, a case in court involves risk, and the fact is that to pursue a vertical merger in court, and recent experience backs that up, is difficult. It's very difficult for DOJ to win a vertical merger
Meaning
case.
post Dr. Miles? Yeah.
Yes. So that it's hard, given the current state of the law, for DOJ to pursue a vertical merger case. So that will make them, in many cases, hesitant to do that.
Right.
The second issue, I think, that comes up here is the need for witnesses in a court case. And in in a situation where there's a pervasive fear of the dominant firm, where venues and promoters and other independent rivals will potentially suffer consequences, and history since then has suggested that's the case, they would have to testify in court. And to get someone to take that risk is not an easy ask.
The point about Dr. Miles and Legion is interesting, although, if I'm not mistaken, they pitched this as a horizontal merger, didn't they? And didn't the complaint identify it as a horizontal, not a vertical?
Well, there's a horizontal component as well as a vertical component. The conduct remedy part of it clearly goes to the vertical part of the issue.
Now, the consent decree includes a divestiture and also prohibitions on tying the ticketing services and the concert promotion. You want to say anything about how those have worked in practice and why?
Well, obviously, the investigation that culminated in the 2020 modification to the consent decree showed that, in fact, this was repeatedly violated. The DOJ described 6 instances, but also pointed to a pervasive environment of fear of retaliation. And as a result, it shows that when a company has incentives to act in a particular way, a consent decree isn't necessarily going to stop them from doing that.
Right. Mr. Brookhold, do you want to respond?
Yes, I absolutely acknowledge, Senator, that the Department of Justice alleged 6 issues in 2019, which led to our decision with them to extend the consent decree. We did not feel it made sense to be seen as defending the theories of retaliation or threats. It's not our business practice. It goes against our fundamental focus on alignment with the artist, the idea that we would ever put our interest ahead of theirs. So we were comfortable extending the consent decree. As she mentioned, there were several things that changed because we had different interpretations. And one of the things that we've done is in instances where venues are seeking to tying a ticketing and a concert agreement into an overall deal, we have eliminated those so that there can't be any instance where there's the perception of threats or retaliation associated with that bundling done at the venue's request. So we've simply eliminated that from our service set, along with the establishment of monitors to make sure that any venue employee or others could confidentially report any issues.
Is it accurate to say that at a minimum, that Live Nation at a minimum was a motivated and capable, potentially, if not likely, competitor?
I'm sorry,
At the time of the merger, is it accurate to say that at the time of the merger, Live Nation was an emerging, nascent competitor and likely a very capable potential competitor?
I would say, Senator, that Live Nation at the time was finding that it was very difficult to build its own ticketing system, that one of the driving motivations to the Ticketmaster merger was the feeling that it wasn't going to successfully build its own system, and it sought to find one that could more effectively serve its needs of selling tickets for fans.
Yeah, I'm out of time, but they had sold 6 million tickets, and they did rise to a pretty prominent position in the marketplace in 2 months. So that's not nothing. We'll get to that later. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. I'll start with you, Ms. Bradish. As a former antitrust attorney who studied these markets, do you agree that the ticketing market was more competitive when Ticketmaster was competing with Live Nation as separate companies?
Certainly, and especially where you have a potential new entrant that's showing the ability to increase its market share rapidly and with great success. That's precisely the kind of pressure that you would want to have on a dominant player to make sure that they act in a competitive fashion. The loss of that is the loss of competition.
Exactly. Mr. Brookhold, we've heard serious concerns from artists, promoters, venues that Live Nation's dominance in the concert tour promotion can pressure venues to use Ticketmaster's primary ticketing service exclusively. How else would you explain the fact that Ticketmaster has 80% of major venues contracts in the U.S.?
It is absolutely our policy to not pressure, threaten, or retaliate against venues by using content as part of the ticketing discussion.
Mr. Michelson, have you seen Live Nation leveraging its power as the leading concert promoter to pressure venues to use Ticketmaster for primary ticketing? How are they able to do that?
When speaking with people that either own or manage venues, their biggest fear is if they leave Ticketmaster, they will lose content. So whether it's said or not, it's implied that if I don't use Ticketmaster, I am not gonna get all the shows that I would like to have.
Get it?
And by the way, if you look at the difference between the Target Center in Minneapolis and the Xcel Energy Center in St. Paul, the Target Center is ticketed by Access. The Xcel Energy Center is ticketed by Ticketmaster. Look at the number of shows that play Xcel, and you'll see they far exceed the number of shows that play Target. And when you look at and break it down a little farther, you'll see that most of the shows that play Xcel are Live Nation shows, and they bring very few to the access-controlled venue, the Target Center.
Okay, thanks for that local reference. Mr. Berchtold, one way that Live Nation eliminates competitive pressures by locking venues into multi-year contracts, whether they 3 years, 5 years, 7 years. If you've tied up 80% of major concert venues with multi-year contracts, where is there room for one of your competitors to get in the door?
Yes, Senator. First, I would note that the 80% reference, I believe, is from a 2008 Department of Justice study, and we believe that our market share is substantially lower than that. I will.
How much lower?
We would, variety of ways of estimating the market share in the industry, depending on what you include. We believe our market share would be somewhere between the 50 and 60% range.
Keep going.
Yes, I will absolutely acknowledge that it is the standard practice of venues in the United States who own ticketing rights to maximize the value of the ticketing rights they own by having long-term exclusive agreements with primary ticketing companies. Those ticketing contracts tend to last 3 to 5 years on average. I would note a very specific indication of the high level of competitiveness is first that with almost every contract renewal we have over the past decade, more of the money gets accrued to the venues as opposed to the primary ticketing provider, which would be one indicator of a very competitive marketplace. Secondly, I would note the success that SeatGeek had between 2018 and 2022, adding roughly 15% of the NFL and the NBA teams as primary ticketing clients, showed the level of movement of these clients.
Okay, Ms. Bradish, did these type of exclusive contracts, did they shut out competitors? To me, like, if you can't go to anyone else, what are you going to do?
Exactly. And I think it's a standard given in antitrust law that the longer the exclusivity in a contract, the greater the risk of a competitive effect. And the fact that they're able to get this length of contract indicates something about their market power. So, of course, it makes it much harder for particularly a newer entrant to get into the market if everybody is already tied up.
And Mr. Grotzinger, do you think that, to go to another topic, that Live Nation's concert promotion business, the fact that they're combined, has made it harder for you to compete for primary ticketing with Ticketmaster?
Yeah, absolutely, it has. Typically, we'll go to a prospective client, we will show them our technology, they'll get excited. They'll get excited about how it's going to make the experience better for their fans and allow them to run their business better. And then they'll start to think about the concert threat, and they'll talk, and discussions will often close at that point because they've heard or been explicitly threatened in a way that they know they will lose concerts if they move away from Ticketmaster. And one other thing I'd note that's, I think, particularly scary on that last topic is in response to some of the oversight and poking that has happened recently, we've seen Ticketmaster moving from 5 years, which used to be the standard length for a contract in our industry to 10 in many cases. They're trying to lock things down so that if there is more pressure, they've at least signed a lot of these decade-long deals. So there's not a lot of time. If we want competition in this industry, it is already going to be very hard to change. Longer contracts make that even harder, and that is what they've been pushing for recently.
Exactly. Last, Mr. Lawrence, what was the amount you said, the percentage of your tickets, some of the highest ones you've had recently that were fees?
Typically with Ticketmaster, we'll see a 40%-ish or closer to 50% fee added on top. We have seen really outlandish numbers, like we had a show last spring where there was an 82% fee on top of the base price. And again, we have no say in, or we don't even know what it's going to be until it goes on sale.
Mr. Brookdale, you heard Mr. Lawrence. With Ticketmaster's market power, which we all know exists, we'd be kidding ourselves if we said it didn't exist. Why haven't you done more to reduce fees?
As I noted in my comments, Senator, the fees are set by the venues. The Live Nation venues have fees that are consistent with the other venues in the marketplace and cover the cost of the operation of those venues.
Mr. Lawrence wants to reply.
We definitely ask venues before almost every show, what's the ticket fee going to be? Both venues that Live Nation owns and ones that they just operate. And they always certainly don't take responsibility for the fees. So I don't know who is doing the fees, but we ask that question to the venues and they say, not only do we not choose what it is, we don't even know what it is. We can't even tell you what it's going to be. So I don't know where the answer lies, but no one's
Okay.
taking responsibility.
Last word, Ms. Bradish. Transparency would be helpful to know what the fees are. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
The market can't work well without transparency.
That's clearly there isn't transparency when no one knows who sets the fees.
Yes.
Okay, with that, Senator Cornyn.
Thank you very much. Appreciate all the witnesses being here, and this obviously is a concerning status quo. I just want to reflect a couple of years back during the height of the pandemic, we wondered whether many of these venues would survive, including in my state in Texas. And it's great to see that the work that Congress did with Save Our Stages and other support that Senator Klobuchar and I led had a positive impact on preserving many of these, especially smaller venues, and making it possible for many of the small businesses, which, Mr. Lawrence, I guess you would qualify as a small business, can continue to provide entertainment in these venues. I think what we've heard today does cry out for some response by Congress, but candidly, I'm not sure that the antitrust laws are the best tool in our toolbox, but that's something that we'll be talking more about in the near future. Mr. Berchtold, I'm intrigued by a couple of your statements. You said that you have an artist-first business model, and then you had later said you would never put your interests ahead of theirs. Is that your testimony?
Yes, Senator, that is the approach of our business. Culturally, we believe that it's all about getting that artist on stage, letting them connect with their fans. And we believe if we support that and consistently act that way, then we will have a long and successful business working with artists and providing them services.
I guess without the artists, you would not have a business.
That's correct, sir.
Mr. Lawrence, has that been your experience, that Live Nation never puts their interests ahead of the artists and that they have an artist-first business model?
I think generally when we show up to play a show, the people that work for Live Nation at the venue absolutely, try to be partners to us in putting on the best concert. I think that the places where sometimes maybe you could feel like it's not artist first is just in the structure of the way some of the deals with the artists, when you look at the settlement sheet at the end of the night, where which breaks down who gets paid what, some of those line items where we have no say in setting any of the prices of those things, yet some of them are Live Nation directly setting the price for things that they are paying to other entities that they might own, which directly impacts the profit pool from which the artist's pay is being derived. those are the moments where I wouldn't say it's not artists first. I mean, who's to say? But like, those are the moments where it feels like we're not truly aligned in our incentives.
Well, for your band to make $6 out of a $42 ticket price,
Yeah, that doesn't feel great.
doesn't strike me as artist first.
I would agree with that.
Mr. Berchtold, you talked about how few venues that Live Nation actually owns, but the truth is that you have these, I think you alluded to this, you have these long-term exclusive rights contracts with many venues that you don't actually own, or that you have some sort of partial ownership where you have effective, at least contractual control over those venues. Is that correct?
Yeah, Senator, if I could differentiate on the ticketing side and the ticketing contracts as opposed to on the promotion side. So on the promotion side of the business, which Senator Klobuchar was asking about, there are roughly 4,000 venues in the United States. Roughly 200 of them we operate, often don't own the underlying business, but operate the buildings. And then we have roughly 40 more buildings with which we have an exclusive promoter relationship. So that's a very small portion of the market for venues.
So whether or not you actually own the venue, you do have effective influence and maybe in some cases outright control over what the venue charges in terms of the ticket price, correct?
In roughly 240 buildings, or 5 or 6% of the markets are yes.
Mr. Mickelson, why is it so hard for the average consumer to get access to tickets, and who benefits from less consumer access? Is it not the artist, I assume?
That's a good question, Senator. Let's take the Taylor Swift fiasco as an example. The fans had to sign up through verified fan to be able to even buy a ticket. Ticketmaster knew that the demand was enormous, bigger, larger than most any other show. And when they set the tickets up for sale, there's two ways you can do that. You can set the tickets so that they are best available, which means that you'll sell more tickets because the fans don't have a choice, or you can do pick a seat, where it slows the process down. The process, when it's slowed down, increases the money that Ticketmaster makes because they make money on fees, and as the ticket prices go up due to dynamically priced tickets, Ticketmaster makes more to that. So it's to their advantage to slow the process down and to do pick a seat, so that it created the frenzy that drove the prices up, which again, Ticketmaster's getting a percentage of that fee. And the higher the ticket price, the higher the fee. So I think that it was driven by the corporate bottom line in the Taylor Swift fiasco, Ticketmaster's bottom line.
I see my time is up. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Cornyn. Senator Whitehouse.
Thanks, Senator Klobuchar. Let me start off by offering a Rhode Island welcome to Mr. Lawrence.
Yeah, 7 out of the 8 members of our band went to Brown University, so we
That's
have a lot
pretty
of Rhode
impressive.
Island pride.
That's pretty impressive. What were your favorite venues?
We played at a local venue called AS220 a bunch,
Oh, yeah.
but honestly, we mostly played at like house parties on campus. That was kind of where we got our start. We also played recently a bunch at Fett Music Hall.
Well, AS220 is a great organization, and I'm proud to have you in the middle of this as a group that emerged from our terrific Brown University.
Thank you.
You mentioned in your testimony today that when artists like you play a Live Nation venue, you typically are also required to use Ticketmaster and a Live Nation-owned promoter. If that were not the expectation, what would the difference, you think, be for your band and your fans?
Well, if we had the ability to weigh different offers, then we would just be able to see a more apples-to-apples comparison of what kind of deals we could get in a given venue. But you're correct in saying that, yes, when we pick a given venue, if it's a venue that Live Nation is either the exclusive promoter or the operator or the owner of, there's no opportunity but to just receive a deal that we have no ability to negotiate from Live Nation. And yes, the tickets have to be ticketed by Ticketmaster. There's a, it would be great to be able to find out, oh, if it was this ticketing company, it might be a different fee, or I know Mr. Berchtold saying that the venue sets the fee, which has not been our experience, but, ideally we'd be able to see,
Could
oh, if
you-
it was this company, it would be this or whatever.
Say a little bit more about how that has not been your experience?
It's 100% not been our experience. Yeah, there's literally not been a single time in our career when we've played at a Live Nation venue where we had any opportunity to not have Live Nation be the promoter or not have Ticketmaster be the ticketing company.
Have you heard of any other artists who've been able to figure out a way around that? Or do you think that all artists are up against the same wall that you've described of inevitability?
Yeah, as far as I'm aware, no one's had a different experience than me. I know at the highest levels of playing like stadiums or arenas, there might be an opportunity to have a certain promoter come in and do that arena, but I don't, that's not my area. In terms of,
In time, Mr. Lawrence, in
yeah,
time.
hopefully.
Well, thanks very much. I appreciate you being here, and thank you, I guess it's Acting Chair Klobuchar for the hearing.
All right, thank you very much, Senator Whitehouse. And I noticed, Mr. Nuzzo, that Mr. Lawrence has been getting a lot of the questions, and I know your daughters are watching. So Senator Lee and I promise we will ask you a question on a second round if no one else does. That's a little cute for you guys. Next up, we have Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you to you all for being here. In Tennessee, this has been an issue where there's been a lot of conversation about it. And Mr. Berchtold, thank you for your time yesterday to talk about this. As I told you, we've got a lot of people that are very unhappy with the way some of this has been approached. And there is frustration. We talked yesterday about the bots and how they impact Ticketmaster's operations, and you have blamed bot attacks on causing the crash during the Taylor Swift ticket sales, and ticket vendors seem to view bot attacks as normal to their operations. And Chair Durbin had mentioned, and of course we all know the Bots Act is something when I was in the House that got passed, signed into law. Senator Schumer had carried that over in the Senate. The FTC has only enforced this once. And they've had the authority to do this since 2016. So this is an unacceptable situation. Senator Blumenthal and I are going to do some more work on this at Commerce, at the Commerce Committee, at the Consumer Protection Subcommittee. But I do have a couple of questions. I've got about 4 questions, Mr. Berchtold, and I want to move quickly through this. So don't try to just run the clock out on me, which I don't appreciate that. So the data that you collect. Now, there's a 2019 report that showed that Ticketmaster's app has more downloads and more active users than any of its competitors. And I bet if I went down, everybody would shake their head yes, that is correct. And you have the most monthly active user growth that anyone is seeing. So, and I want you to submit the answers to this to me in writing. But let's take the Orange Bowl app, which I downloaded last month, taking my grandsons to the Orange Bowl. Go Vols, a big win there. That app is powered by Ticketmaster. Now, when you use that app, you can purchase parking, official merchandise, access travel sites. So you are getting a lot of consumer data and consumer information. So I want to know, what are you doing with that data? Now, you told me yesterday you block about 90% of the bot attacks that you get, but that's a failing grade. And we know that because, and there ought to be people you can get some good advice from, because our critical infrastructure in this country, whether it is utilities, electric, water, power, banking services, credit card processors, payment processors, healthcare companies, you know what? They get bot attacks every single day by the thousands. By the thousands. And they have figured it out, but you guys haven't. This is unbelievable. You ought to be able to get some good advice from some people and figure this out. So what are you doing with the information? As you get this bot attacks, are they coming in here and scooping up consumer information? When consumers buy tickets from StubHub and they're required to return to Ticketmaster to have their order fulfilled, are you getting their data? And what are you doing with it? Are you then sharing it with these other vendors? What kind of protections are around it? How are you safeguarding this? So I would like a response to that in writing from you, because that is going to determine how we move forward. The FTC has the responsibility. They have the authority, but you, sir, are responsible to the consumers. You're controlling 70%, 80% of the ability of consumers to access tickets to sporting events, to concerts. And when I run into an entertainer, and Mr. Lawrence, you need to come to Nashville. We're
We've
gonna
been
have
there. We just played a couple months ago.
Come on back. Make it your home.
Sure thing.
People love Tennessee. But, you know, we need to have an answer to this. Yes, the FTC has the authority. Yes, the legislation was signed into law. I agree that they are not exercising it. But how many times have you called the FTC and said, we need your help?
Yes, Senator, we will submit in writing the answers to your questions that you requested.
How many times have you called the FTC and say, help me with this?
We worked with the FTC on an investigation. I believe it was late 2019 or 2020. We obviously during
So
COVID
you called them
shut down.
once? You called them once and said, help me
That was the time
out?
that we were able to have the information, work with them to get prosecution.
Why is it that you cannot identify a bot attack? You told me yesterday you have a hard time distinguishing between a bot attack and a consumer. But the local power company down here that is not the billion-dollar company you are, they can tell when they've got a bad actor in their system. They figured out how to define a bot in their system, but you can't? Do we
Yes, sir.
need to make certain you have better people around your IT team?
Yes, Senator, it is absolutely an ever-going arms race in terms of fighting the bots. These are bots that are not trying to generally break into our system. They're bots that are trying to impersonate people to get tickets on an automated basis faster and putting true fans at a disadvantage.
It is American consumers, true fans, yes, American consumers. Madam Chairman, I have one other question if we do a second round.
Okay, that'll be good. We will do a second round because we also want to get to solutions here. And I appreciate your question, Senator Blackburn. Next up, Senator Blumenthal.
Thanks so much, Chairman Klobuchar, and thank you for your great work on this issue and so many others involving antitrust, and my thanks as well to Senator Lee. Thank you to everyone for being here today. Mr. Berchtold, I want to congratulate and thank you for an absolutely stunning achievement. You have brought together Republicans and Democrats in an absolutely unified cause. And may I suggest respectfully that unfortunately your approach today in this hearing is going to solidify that cooperation, because as I hear and read what you have to say, it's basically, it's not us. It's everyone but us. And the fact of the matter is that Live Nation, Ticketmaster, is the 800-pound gorilla here. You have clear dominance, monopolistic control. This whole concert ticket system is a mess. It's a monopolistic mess. And the numbers refute many of your arguments. That's the reason we've had two, count them, two consent decrees, and why the Justice Department is now investigating violations of that second consent decree. Ticketmaster had the temerity to imply that the debacle involved in pre-ticket sales was Taylor Swift's fault because she was failing to do too many concerts. And may I suggest respectfully that Ticketmaster ought to look in the mirror and say, I'm the problem. It's me. And the reason is quite simply that you are the ones ultimately responsible for the astronomically rising prices, the exorbitant hidden fees, the sold-out shows, the bots and scalpers. We just had an exchange with Senator Blackburn. You've reported once, over this entire history, once, an instance involving bots. I agree with Senator Blackburn that there needs to be stronger enforcement by the FTC. It has taken almost no action against the bots, despite our support for the Bots Act. And that is the reason why I am supporting legislation, talking about remedies, legislation called the BOSS Act, which would require transparency, accountability for hidden fees, for bots. Will you support the BOSS Act?
Yes, Senator, we would absolutely agree that. I'm sorry. Senator, we absolutely agree there are a lot of problems in this industry, and as the leading player, we have an obligation to do better.
Will you support the BOSS Act?
I don't know all of the specific elements. I know there are many elements that we agree upon. I believe there are some issues that we have some differing views, and we've offered to discuss those. We'd like to continue to discuss those going forward.
Will you support legislation to require complete transparency, all in, to provide stronger enforcement powers against bots and scalpers?
We absolutely support all-in pricing. We absolutely support greater enforcement, greater penalties, and expansion of the prohibition on bots.
You know, the FTC has failed in some of its enforcement duties, but that is because Live Nation, Ticketmaster have failed to do the reporting that's required to enable enforcement. And I think that really betrays the contention that you have been active against it. And I think that consumers and artists and venues are all fed up with the system that exists right now. And I think to the people who are fed up, I would say, continue your criticism. If you're angry and frustrated, you have the power to demand action, and we should act with new legislation. If the Department of Justice establishes violation of the consent decree, unwinding the merger ought to be on the table. If the Department of Justice establishes facts that involve monopolistic and predatory abuses, there ought to be structural remedies, such as breaking up the company. We'll see what the Department of Justice finds. And to the FTC, we owe the duty of providing resources that are needed for more effective enforcement, and the incentives and the kinds of encouragement and support for action in this area. Let me ask you, will you support other kinds of legislation that would enable more transparency in this area?
As a general concept, absolutely, we support more transparency. And I also commit that if you pass harder laws on bots with greater enforcement, that I will commit that we will do our part to support that.
And will you take action against the bots?
If we get the laws that are going to be enforced and supported and have real teeth and penalties against people, we will
But
do
you
our part.
have the power right now to take action. Why haven't you done it?
We have a limited level of power on something that hasn't been consistently enforced.
You have unlimited power to go to court. Under the current Bots Act, which we have supported, we've given you the right of action. You are the only ones who have the resources and the knowledge to take effective action right now. Why haven't you done it?
Well, we'd love the support of further laws, of working with the FTC, getting other information on the actual sale of the bot-generated tickets on the various secondary platforms.
If you are concerned about artists, consumers, venues, and about the public interest, you would take action under current law. You have the right of action, you have the resources, and you have the kinds of legal authority to do it. And so that is why I come back to where I began. Your approach seems to be, it's everyone else who's responsible here, not us. And I hope that that approach will change in the future. Thank you, Madam
Okay.
Chair.
Thank you, Senator Blumenthal. Next up, we have Senator Kennedy and then Senator Hirono.
Mr. Berchtold, am I saying that right?
Yes, Senator, thank you.
Mr. Berchtold, I'm not against big per se. I am against dumb. And the way your company handled the ticket sales for Ms. Swift was a debacle. And whoever in your company was in charge of that ought to be fired. Number two, I hear two things today. I hear some of you saying that that we have an antitrust situation here, and that is wrong from an academic perspective and a consumer protection perspective. I hear others of you saying Live Nation's making too much money and we want some of it. Okay? But I hear all of you saying you care about the consumer, and I take you at your word. So how would you feel about adopting a rule, which it seems to me would satisfy the bot situation? Let's just adopt a rule. Well, strike that. I don't want to make it a suggestion because I want to think it through more. But let me ask you your opinion. You're the experts. What if we adopt a rule that said tickets to a Taylor Swift concert or Mr. Lawrence's band's concert are non-transferable? Now, you're not going to have a problem with bots, okay? If you got a scalper trying to buy 2,000 tickets, they don't want 2,000 tickets. They want a profit. And it'll hold down ticket prices. Why don't we do that? Don't everybody jump in at once.
I mean, I think whether it was that or only transferable at face value, I'm not an expert on the secondary ticketing market, so all I can tell you is that from the artist perspective, we would not make $1 less if
Yeah,
that
but
were
Ms. Lawrence, if you
implemented.
care about the consumer, and I hear you say that you do, I'll tell you what the consumer is concerned about. The consumer is not concerned about how many lawyers can dance on the head of a pin and whether this is a antitrust violation or not, or the FTC. The consumer is concerned about the price.
Yeah, so I'm saying I think
So would you support non-transferability, or you can only transfer it at face value?
I mean, I think it's a really interesting question. I'm not an
Back to you,
expert
Ms.
on it.
Bradish.
Well, I think non-transferability is making a judgment in lieu of what a customer would make.
I understand what it means. Would you support that?
No.
Okay, how about you, Mr. Nuzzo?
I would respectfully not support such a rule.
Okay. How about you, Mr. Mickelson?
Michelson, but that's good. Yes, Senator, good question. Totally support non-transferability.
Okay, thank you.
Totally.
Next, sir.
We respectfully think transferability is important for consumers.
You think it's important? Is it important for consumers or for the middlemen?
Like, let's say I'm going to a show with Jerry and I buy the tickets. I want to be able to send that ticket to Jerry so that we can go together.
That's the exception rather than the rule.
Yeah, it's certainly, I think there's interesting ways we could use.
A few people may have to eat the ticket. They get sick, they can't go. But most people will think about that before they buy the ticket. Now, if you want to hold down prices, cut out the middlemen and the middlewomen. You want to cut out bots, make it non-transferable or transferable only at price, at face value. Couldn't a major artist, couldn't a Bruce Springsteen say, whose music I love, couldn't he say, look, I've got market power. I'm going to set this price for the ticket. I'm going to set this price for the service fee, and it's going to be non-transferable. Couldn't an artist do that with market power?
For sure. Yeah, I think it's an interesting idea, and
Problem solved.
some artists have done that.
Problem solved.
For sure.
How about that, Mr. Burkholdt?
Yes, Senator, we would fully support an artist's right to make their